Hi, welcome back to Into Deep, a podcast with me, Alyssa. In this podcast, we go a little too deep into everything feminism, from witchcraft to holistic healing methods to bone marrow and beef tallow. Yes, in this episode, we're talking about some interesting online trends, which seem to be typically only women taking part in them. I guess I would call them TikTok popularized post-feminist archetypes, which we will get into and explain because that literally doesn't make any sense. Anyway, if you're watching the video version this week, I know that the setup is really ugly. I'm recording it on my laptop camera, which is kind of making me feel like a 2008 YouTuber. So I kind of like it. But yeah, it's probably a little bit ugly, but I couldn't be bothered setting up a whole space this time, so this is gonna have to do. This is kind of a continuation, or not necessarily a continuation, but more information built off what I discussed in my social justice warriors episode with my friend Victoria. We talked about the 2010s version of feminism, which was in fact not really feminism at all, because it became so closely intertwined with capitalism and essentially capitalizing off feminist ideas. Fuck the patriarchy key rings, like Taylor Swift said, girl boss CEOs to Instagram infographics, and also the beginning of influencer era as well. This type of feminism could be said to have paved the way for the divine feminine soft girl era. I'm just a girl, and working out your astrocartography to find out where you need to move to in the world to find your soulmate. I fear they're all connected. These sorts of trends, as many of us have seen, tend to lead consumers of the trend down a kind of traditional right-wing pipeline, which is interesting, especially when you see them on the surface level. Because even something as simple as crocheting, that doesn't sound like it's right-wing innately, but a lot of the people that consume this content end up going down like a tradwife pipeline. So I guess what we're looking at today is kind of how and why a lot of these trends came about, and also the impact that they're having, how they can kind of lead women into other spaces. I think especially this also leans into choice feminism as well, which again I talked about in my second episode. Tradwifery is sold as a choice to be a housewife, and lean into your feminine energy, wherein a man financially supports you, and then you're allowed to just stay home and knit and bake, 10 children, but for some reason you're never taking care of them on camera. This trad wife thinking, or going back to the trad wife 1960s cosplaying as a 1960s housewife era, not only is it obviously very conservative, but it also discounts the centuries of feminism which attempted to free us from the grasps of marriage in general, but particularly patriarchal marriage, where a wife and a husband have very specific roles. Most of this episode inspiration is from an article I read in February in the Point magazine by Grazia Sophia Christie, titled Among the Post-Feminists. This article puts the concept really well, and she also just has so many different examples and so many different references to trends on the internet, and kind of brings them all together in a way that she titles the Post-Feminists. While at this point something so obviously anti-feminist as a trad wife has been discussed enough, we've talked it to death, no one in their right mind thinks that a trad wife can be a feminist, or that choosing to be a trad wife is ever a feminist choice. But the author of this article questions, what about her sisters, catalogued likewise online? The chronic sufferer shopping for detoxes, the she shaman ketamine tripping from medieval hut to modern Tullum, the overgrown girl, the nun vocation questionable in a cloistered abbey, the outright scammer convinced she can turn the lemons of misogyny into lemonade for herself, Seemingly unrelated except for one unifying theme, they all consider themselves the victims or survivors of a vast feminist setup. That is kind of the whole point that I'm trying to get across here. A lot of these women feel like feminism has wronged them, but they also, in doing that, have another connection as well, even if they're unrelated. It always seems that they're trying to find their feminine energy or heal their feminine energy or go back to a day before feminism when women were allowed to be feminine. Whatever that means. As I've said, feminism of the 2010s was uniquely westernized, but like not necessarily just westernized. It was a very specific type of woman that everyone wanted to be. It was about finding empowerment through your girl boss, business, HR, management position in the big city. Like when I imagine a 2010s feminist, she has to live in New York. You can't live in a different city. That's the only place you could be a feminist in the 2010s. And you had to be working your way up to CEO, otherwise you weren't a girl boss feminist. Also, being as sexually liberated as a Sex and the City protagonist. This feminism, while not being feminism, was also a lie. As we've talked about, you can't shape a system that's built on your subordination to benefit you. As the author of this article says, misogyny was a feedback loop that would keep running unless we intervened in it. Systemic, embedded in all of our expectations, and validated each time we played along. Anyone who is benefiting from specific parts of the patriarchy, they're not really benefiting, they're just playing along with a role of what a woman is expected to do. Any benefits they get from that aren't really material benefits because of a few reasons. For example, the female CEO still benefits off the backs of other marginalized groups. I mean, specifically CEOs of like big companies. Someone always has to be being exploited for you to have that much money or for you to like be running a huge company like that. Someone's getting exploited. When people are like, oh, feminism is when there's the same amount of CEOs that are female and male, or feminism is when we have more women becoming billionaires. No, it's not. No, it's not. Because to be a billionaire, obviously you have to exploit people, like even more so than being a CEO of a big company. Like a higher percentage of the people that you're exploiting are likely to be women. For example, a CEO of like, I can't even think of any brands, like Boohoo, probably, I don't know, could be owned by a woman. All of these like stupid fashion companies that are fast fashion. The women who are working in the sweatshops and who are getting paid nothing, they're women. Like, you can't be a feminist or be a girl boss CEO when all of your success is attributed to exploiting marginalized groups who are underneath you. That's not what feminism is. Another example, the sexually liberated big city woman is still impacted by the orgasm gap. Even if it doesn't impact her specifically, as an individual, you using the patriarchy to your advantage, or you using men to your advantage, or you manipulating men to like, I don't know, get financial gain from them, or like even like sexual gratification or something like that. That's not something that's being applied to all women. You might be able to make the patriarchy work for you, but it's not like doing anything actually, feminist, to make yourself be empowered by a system that again feeds off your own subordination. Even if you are empowered enough to use the patriarchy or capitalism in a certain way to benefit you, it's always going to be impacting other people in a negative way. These supposed feminist actions or feminist ideals in the 2010s were not liberatory in any way when the system that you're making those choices under was never deconstructed in the first place. Like, you can choose to do all of these things and use the patriarchy to your advantage or use capitalism to your advantage, but that's actually not liberating anyone. And the only reason you're able to do that is because you're in some kind of a privileged position to be able to do that. Because people who are more marginalized than you won't be able to use it to the same advantage, right? So many people, women included, think that we live in a post-feminist society because women have jobs now and we don't have to take our husband's last name in marriage. And, you know, women can choose to be single mothers if they want, like all of these different things. Women can work any job that they want, theoretically. This not only gives a false sense of what feminism is, but it also reduces like real world issues women face as a class to kind of just like not trying hard enough or victimizing yourself. Obviously now, for example, women can get a trade. They can work as a tradesperson, right? However, as a woman going into that field, the likelihood that you experience sexual harassment, abuse, like violence from your colleagues because they're all men and it's a very like men's club sort of thing for tradies, that likelihood it's like extremely high, right? And if you complain about anything like this, you're victimizing yourself or you're just not trying hard enough, because like under the law, obviously women and men can't be paid differently. Again, that goes into like the gender pay gap idea as well. Obviously, it's illegal to pay women and men differently, right? But why is it that the gender pay gap still exists? Not only because women can't always go into the jobs that men do without risk of being treated differently, even just being treated differently, but also experiencing things worse than just being treated differently. But also because jobs that are typically female jobs, like being a nurse or a teacher, are paid less because they're jobs that are feminized. Like that's why they get paid less. Women are thought to like be better at being nurses and teachers because we're more motherly and nurturing. Again, obviously not true. But that's the reason those jobs are paid less, because it seems to be something that is like innate to women. So why do we have to pay them for it if it's not something they need to learn how to do, right? Speaking of, being a nurse or a teacher, potentially like the worst two jobs you could do. And they get paid like so shit for it as well. I would genuinely rather die than be a teacher. I don't know how they do that. Like, I seriously don't know. I can't even, like, when I do tutoring, I can't even control one child. How are they controlling a whole class? Anyway, I've digressed a little bit. But when you believe that women have achieved equality and that we live in like a post-feminist society and that women have achieved equality under the law, at least, any issue women face just comes across as like we're complaining. I mean, like, haven't we been given enough? They've given us the right to work. Aren't we equal under the law? Why are we still complaining? Many, particularly millennial women who kind of grew up on the internet in the 2010s during that mainstream feminism, begin to blame that kind of feminism for their unhappiness in life, turning instead to influencers who promote like, I'm just a girl dinner, soft girl era. Growing up in that girl boss era when women were forced to choose, well, not forced, but women were kind of chose to choose their career over anything. And that also is what I mean when I say that type of feminism was so based in capitalism. It was like, get a good paying job, like all of this sort of stuff. Women feel like, or these types of women feel like, because they were forced to choose their career, it cut off their feminine side. They were working a job, so they were in their masculine, which is kind of crazy because that's like pre-1900s thinking that working a job is masculine. It was never about choosing your career or choosing getting money or choosing like to be a girl boss or something. It was never about that, because all of those things were so closely related to capitalism. You were only succeeding as much as you could under a system which is both like patriarchal and capitalistic. Those things combine and work together against the ability for women to ever emancipate themselves. It wasn't about choosing your career or financial gain. It was about choosing knowledge, independence under capitalism, which, yes, unfortunately means being financially independent as well. But it just generally was about giving women the ability to be something other than wife and mother. Not because either of those roles are necessarily bad, but they are bad because of what is expected of them, right? They shouldn't be bad, but they are. It was never about being equal to men in these ways, because again, without actually breaking down the patriarchy or capitalism, that's not possible. And also, you don't want to be equal to a man when it comes to men who are evil and exploit hundreds of thousands of people for financial gain. Being like equal to them in Western society, for example, that is not pushing feminism anywhere. If anything, it's making it worse for women in other countries who are not as privileged as you. Women who chose their career every time in the 2010s and never actually got anywhere with it begin to blame feminism for their unhappiness and their issues. They begin to blame feminism for even giving women the right to work in the first place, which is always a silly argument because women have always worked unless they were like really, really rich and white. And in that case, they paid another woman to do stuff for them, right? There's never been a time in history where women have just sat around and done nothing. Even if it was unpaid work, taking care of a household. But also we did other work too. It wasn't even just the unpaid housewife work. So anyway, now we're going to get into what the author of this article that I've been talking about, but also I've kind of built on it as well. I guess the post-feminist archetypes. The groups of women on the internet who have some like issue with feminism and instead have turned to post-feminism, but also in a way pre-feminism, and are trying to go back to their basics, their raw, unfiltered feminist energy. Our first archetype is the Bella Hadid, the fragile, diseased woman looking to Mother Earth for her healing power. She also has chronic Lyme disease, which she probably caught in the Hamptons. Let me read you a quote from the article about how in that kind of 2010s era, you could never assume that a woman was weak, right? And that still kind of exists today. She says, "Let us examine a trick I pull each time I board an airplane. How I pretend to struggle with my suitcase in the aisle when I've already picked out the man who will lift it for me. We've already made eye contact, he and I, the guy in the blue sweatshirt. His body tenses in advance of exertion. He even shifts his briefcase from his lap. Still, we go through the pantomime of hoisting my suitcase high in the air, of grunting and flailing until he stands to save me. Neither of us is allowed to assume as a woman is weak. I must perform my weakness as some kind of personal defect and then sit for 10 hours with a pain in my side. Yet I am of average height and strength. I have no physical defects, only emotional ones. The overhead bin is too tall for most women by design." I guess the problem with that quote is that even though being on a plane, a lot of women are literally too short to reach the overhead bin, or not strong enough to lift their bag, which, yes, biologically, women tend to be less strong than men. But then in admitting that, you're also sometimes admitting it, or it feels like you're admitting that women are less strong than men and women are weak and women are submissive, even though literally it's not our fault if we can't lift a bag over our head. But that's kind of what she's saying, that especially during that girl boss sort of era where it was women could do anything, you'd never want to admit being weak or fragile, especially back then. However, there's kind of a TikTok trend now where, not even necessarily a TikTok trend, but just a trend with women. For example, the author then brings up Bella Hadid with her chronic Lyme disease, posing gracefully on a fainting couch. I think this was maybe last year or the year before, when everyone thought she was in rehab, but then she just posted pictures of her oh my god, I have Lyme disease and I'm so fragile and sick. You can be sick, but first of all, chronic Lyme disease isn't necessarily a thing in itself. Typically, it's a group of symptoms which are potentially misdiagnosed, or it's another illness, or it's something else. The romanticization of a starved yet wealthy, soft yet frail on her $1 million couch with a cashmere blanket. First of all, the disease that she supposedly has isn't even necessarily real, or most medical professionals won't recognize it as a real disease. The symptoms could also be self-inflicted, perhaps maybe not self-inflicted, but via her upbringing from an almond mom. Realistically, a lot of the women who are like frail and dying don't have like an actual medical condition. It might just be because they have eating disorders, I won't lie. Made up or like self-diagnosed, not even necessarily like diseases that aren't real, but self-diagnosed diseases, oftentimes with a lack of any real medical evidence or any consultation with a real medical professional, not just like some woman who does holistic healing on Instagram, seem to plague the young influencer women of the world, who then seek to sell their audience like parasite detoxes, essential oils, but never seed oils. Stay away from the seed oils. Which, this sort of thing, first of all, it's obviously not scientific, but then that leads the people who are consuming this sort of content and this sort of like idea around natural medicine or natural healing, it leads down a scientific fear-mongering pathway, like birth control ruins your natural hormonal cycle, to anti-vax propaganda. It's all connected because it's all not based in science. The worst part about that as well is that women do really have many gendered health problems that are under-researched and not understood or not even known about by like general practitioners or people who aren't like experts in women's health or gynecology. One of these gendered health issues is not that you have a secret parasite or that your birth control is like not letting you connect to your true feminine because it's blocking your hormones. Nor is it fixable with a coffee enema or a carnivore diet. Do you know what I mean? A quote from this article: "As for my friends, their hives are real too. I can see them. Their hair is falling out. Yet I struggle to separate all their chronic health issues from their chronic discontent. Every dinner or drink state devolves into a litany of complaints, a mutual diagnostic session, the unwinding of some medical mystery whose solution is always more sweet attention to the self. Perhaps unable to speak the truth, it began to eat at them from the inside, on levels both literal and metaphorical. To fall sick after the aspirational 2010s is sensible. Surely you don't have to stand up for the women if you can hardly stand." I think that's what this kind of archetype gets at as well. After the like strong independent womanness of the 2010s, women feel like they're burnt out or they're disconnected from their self and they just need even more focus on their body so they can feel feminine again, which also always comes with being skinny and beautiful for some reason. I as well literally have had the worst hair loss ever for the past like 5 years. Was that because I had a secret underlying illness, or was it because I have the stress levels of being like ran after by a tiger just 24/7? I think it's going to be the stress levels. In my episode that I did on the books that I read in January, like my bonus episode, I mentioned a book by Mary Oliver where I said in that episode that it gave such anti-vax vibes. And it's the same sort of thing here. It's mostly because of the fact that when anyone wants to get into like hiking or camping or doing more things in nature as a woman, like you try and get into these spaces on TikTok or something, but because these like natural spaces or like activities in nature get so connected with natural holistic healing, you fall down the nature rose healing, herbal medicine, give your divine feminine period blood back to nature, Mother Earth, right? Even though these things shouldn't be connected, they are. And as I was talking about in the Mary Oliver book, it kind of gave the vibe that she was like running back to nature to just avoid doing anything actually real in the world and just kind of avoid the entire world in general. This post-feminist archetype is all about finding the supposed natural and biological womanly features and our innate connection to the earth as women, I guess because of our abilities to create life, and seeing a connection between fertility and like Mother Earth, Mother Nature. In believing any of these like fertility, women create life, like women are natural and goddesses, you lean into a bioessentialism inevitably. Bioessentialism that was created by man in order to keep women in the female submissive, soft, and natural role, right? That's not actually anything natural. That was created by men in order to not let women stop being submissive, stop being a housewife, stop being a slave for men, right? Many women who are part of this sort of archetype or like this trend on TikTok or feel like they're, again, even in like the soft feminine sort of way, it always seems like they're trying to like kind of get inspiration from My Year in Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. I don't know how to pronounce her last name, which actually that book was about depression. And then I think in the end, like, she sees 9/11 or something. I don't know. Anyway, it recalls, for example, books like Anna Karenina, when women go crazy and then get sent to like health retreats in Switzerland where they just hang out on the beach or go in a hot spa or just like do nothing or like live in a cabin in the woods. And then when they come back, they're healed by nature. I don't think it's necessarily the nature that's healing them. It's rather not having the stress of everyday life as a housewife and having to take care of so many things at once and having so much responsibility. Not only is this sort of return to nature an extremely outdated form of medical advice, as I've said before, running away from all of your issues into nature to avoid dealing with things is not only extremely privileged, because only the very, very wealthy can go to health retreats, but it is also essentially depoliticizing yourself. For the most part, common mental health conditions like burnout or anxiety are triggered by your environment. An environment which impacts people poorer than you and less privileged than you a lot worse, yet it's always the celebrities and influencers who are the ones that are the most full of complaints about being too fragile to even live as a woman. And my made-up disease is it's just constant pain and I can't live like this anymore. I need to go to my health retreat where I do yoga for 12 hours a day. Again, a lot of these issues might be real issues that you're facing, but it doesn't give you an excuse to be an anti-vaxxer. The second archetype we're going to talk about is the witch trial nostalgist worshipping female divinity during her TikTok tarot reading. How many TikTok tarot readings are you getting on your For You page per day? Like, I swear I'm not interacting with them, but every like third post is just some random lady giving me a tarot reading. At the start of this essay, the author mentions Emma Watson, who was once seen as a feminist icon and whose speech on gender equality at the UN event went viral in 2014. She announced on Instagram last year on her birthday, "This is 33. Before 29, I hadn't even heard of a Saturn return as a concept. Today, I feel butterfly emoji, butterfly emoji, butterfly emoji. Thank you to the witches in my coven." I think many women who were into witchcraft failed to understand that they were killing women during the witch trials, not witches. Emma Watson also now has a luxury gin company made with upcycled grapes that she co-founded with her brother. So yeah, there's a good quote from this article as well, again, about all of these sorts of archetypes and how they feel like they need to kind of heal their like femininity, which has been suppressed by feminism. She shamans or divine feminists have their own kin. The 50s cosplaying tradwife, the overgrown girl in New York taking selfies in toddler tees and hair ribbons. They're all separatists, restoring their injured self-confidence by forming a cult of the feminine. They express a bitter yearning for certain perks of being a woman they denied themselves, and perhaps for nothing, so they follow the pendulum swing, overcorrect right the other way. We are just girls, ditzy, bratty, traditional, superstitious, half ironic performance, half cheeky tantrum, a revival of difference feminism, this time as farce. For she shamans, the 2010s notion that you can speak reality into existence finds its extreme form in the dialect of affirmations. Thanks to divine femininity, a woman will learn she is not a harassed lawyer, bullied back to the office with a half-healed episiotomy. She's a goddess. This idea of feminine energy has trickled down onto women, especially via TikTok. No, you do not need to heal your femininity because femininity is not real. And especially in its connection to being a woman, whatever that means, there's nothing innate about being born a specific sex in general, but I don't really understand how you would think that wearing ribbons or a skirt or wearing makeup is something innate. I don't think you were doing any of those things when you came out of the womb, therefore not innate. Doing Pilates, using beef tallow on your face, eating bone marrow, as I've said, and wearing coquette Brandy Melville pajama sets, probably crafted via slave labor, is not going to heal anything in you, but will rather force you into the same female box that has been created for that purpose, the purpose of captivity, of only letting women act in a certain way, in the same way that men are only allowed to act in a certain way. Like, that's been going on forever. I don't understand how you think you're healing anything by shopping at Brandy Melville. In a report by Fiona Matsen, it was like a university report, but it went into this concept of witch talk really well. The title is #WitchTalk, an examination of female empowerment and an emphasis on the creation of the witchy aesthetic. Witch talk itself, or like witches on TikTok, centers witchcrafts, spells, rituals, often those which are being used to get a man to like you by like writing his name in a book and putting it in a drawer or something. Tarot readings, again, as I said, is a big one. This is not the first time witchcraft has resurged, as this author notes, or neither is it the first time that witchcraft has had ties with feminist movements. 1970s were also a popular time for this subculture, I guess. It was also known at that time as the goddess movement because it was so similar to a religious practice which focused on the divinity and power of women or worshipping goddesses, essentially, instead of gods. In this report, Matsen talks about how witch talk or modern iterations of witchcraft are not actually about creating spaces for female empowerment, even though a lot of women who go to these spaces online, that is what they're looking for. But rather, the big creators in these sorts of TikTok environments emphasize consumerism, which contributes to the witchy aesthetic, rather than actually attempting to empower women. This would make a lot of sense if you remember me talking about how supposed choice or liberal feminist takes are often very much founded in capitalism and consumerism. Think like a Stanley water bottle, any of these sort of things which are like related to that, just a girl, or like feminine sort of things. They're not actually anything real. They're just based in consumerism and attempting to make you buy things, right? To break free from a patriarchy, women who believe in witchcraft would instead worship a female goddess to portray power and femininity, especially like in the 1970s. The original sin of something like this is attempting to make worship itself feminist. It works in the same sort of way of trying to make anything patriarchal feminist because it is innately anti-feminist. Worship itself is innately anti-feminist. Almost all religions are phallocentric for a reason, because one of the main goals of religion is to keep people, especially women, but people in general, like in their place. In the 1970s, there were some groups related to witchcraft who did protests against the patriarchy and capitalism. But the modern post-feminist iteration of the witch does not have that same interest at heart. Witch talk again has a really big focus on healing, which once again does not have any real medical, biological basis, but rather implores witches to heal themselves through the worship of their own bodies and the celebration of womanhood and femininity, which is, again, is sounding a lot like healing your divine feminine, which has been suppressed by feminism. A study by Miller in 2022 found that TikTok witchcraft emphasizes the practice through material goods and maintaining a certain aesthetic. Creators themselves sell things like beginner witch kits, witchcraft herb kits, or moon water. Again, it's not actually based in anything real or even creating like a pro-woman group or community. Oftentimes, it just falls into consumerism and maintaining a certain aesthetic, which again, this like, as I was talking about, this, I don't know, like frail, fragile woman, that is also an aesthetic in itself, which is typically has some kind of basis in eating disorders or coquette or being very childlike in a pedophilic way. It's always about how it looks and the aesthetic of it rather than doing anything real. I think the whole concept of female empowerment like doesn't even make that much sense. It's almost always a choice feminist ideal, being empowered to be able to make your own choices. This again is the end goal of feminism. Perhaps through the liberation of women, we would be able to choose what we want to do without like outside influence from men or doing what men expect us to do or doing what the patriarchy expects of us, right? But again, this could never be successful when we're still operating under a system that feeds off disenfranchising women. Without breaking that down or doing anything to break that down, being a witch on TikTok is not going to be empowering. This moves us on to our last archetype I'm going to talk about. I don't even know if archetype is the right word, but like it kind of sounds good, so that's why I'm using it. This is the female dating strategist who thinks that feminine energy is a genuine means to manipulate men for financial gain. In a recent article published by Daily Mail titled "Femcells Are Becoming the New Incels, Men Hating Women Swear Off Evil Predators, Cheaters, and Wife Beaters," the author calls supposed femcells a rapidly growing group akin to incels, but of women, who share in a hatred of men, who they brand as predators, cheaters, and wife beaters, as I've said. Which firstly is a crazy thing to be mad about because, like, men are often all three of those things. Like, it's not a lie. Like, statistically, that it's not a lie. That is very common for men to do those things. So I don't really know why she has an issue with that. Obviously, this post-feminist archetype has nothing to do with femcells by the definition of what a femcell is. So you might wonder why I've brought up an article about femcells when I'm talking about women who were trying to attract like a high value man. That is because the author of this Daily Mail article conflates femcells with turning the tables by using men for financial gain. This, of course, does not make any sense because even the author of the article like acknowledges that the definition of femcell is a female who is celibate and also a female who doesn't like get into relationships with men, right? Whether she feels that that is involuntary or voluntary, she can still be a femcell as long as she is celibate and doesn't engage in relationships with men, right? By that very simple definition, she is not going to be tricking men into a relationship for financial gain, because then she's not an incel or a femcell, right? Femcells are separatist by definition. You can't be a femcell and date men, because then you're not. It's like if an incel gets a girlfriend, then he's not an incel, right? Even the term femcell is misogynistic in a way. The term incel was created by a woman to describe her own experience. She had a whole website and she was trying to make like a group of people who felt like they couldn't find anyone, which is not something that is unique to men or unique to women. So like even feeling the need to like call yourself a femcell doesn't really make any sense because the term incel was created by a woman. So like, however, obviously I understand that because the term incel has been turned into something completely different in the like red pill category, obviously. So it does make sense why women want to separate themselves from that. And some femcells do turn to like conservatism and like, as someone mentioned in my comments, a lot of them were like pro Donald Trump. Again, of course that's possible, but like by the definition of femcel, it's not going to be someone who was using men for financial gain. This article also falsely claims that femcels are related to the female dating strategy, which, if you don't know, originally started as a Reddit page. I would say a lot of information on this subreddit is actually not terrible, but obviously I don't personally agree with the notion that women should use men for financial gain. First of all, honestly, even for the fact that I don't think people should use each other for things like that, even if it's like a misogynistic man, it just seems a little weird, right? But the main problem with that is because it inevitably puts women in a dangerous situation. I honestly don't think men should ever financially support a woman. But of course there can be gray areas with like family units. But then in that case, for example, if like you're in a couple and only the man works, the woman should have access to all of that money. Like that money should be equally available to both the man and the woman, because obviously in that sort of partnership, the woman is typically bringing up children and doing all of the housework and things like that, which oftentimes takes up more time than whatever the man is doing for work, right? Right. So in the case that a man is financially supporting you, it obviously makes sense in like familial units. And in that case as well, it would make sense if it were the opposite as well. Like if the woman had a better job and she was financially supporting the man. That makes sense because the other person in the partnership is probably doing like the majority of the housework and taking care of children. Okay, that does make sense. However, if you're just dating a man, or if you don't even live together, or like, I don't know, like why is he giving you money? Also, funnily enough, the article quotes a recent post from the FDS Reddit. I don't think it really gets posted on anymore. I don't know if it still exists. But anyway, it said, if a man chokes you during sex, he hates you. Which I read that quote in the article without like reading the context because I was just like skim reading it. And I genuinely thought they were quoting me for a second. And then I realized it was from the Reddit page and I was like, okay, I've like never been on that page. So it wasn't me. But back to like the financial support thing. If a man is financially supporting you, he is financially dominant and you are financially submissive, right? That financial nature of the relationship sets the stage for every other part of your relationship. Socially, sexually, anything else, that's also going to be impacted by the fact that you're submissive in a financial way. Especially if you're not giving back by doing other work around the house. Like as a woman, you shouldn't just be paid for, because as a woman, you actually do have to work too. Like, okay. This article also quotes a supposed expert in feminist media and cultural studies who describes femcels as promoting conservative and toxic behavior to ensnare men who will support them financially. I think this woman is an expert pick-me. She is correct in saying that there are women online who fall into very conservative and bioessentialist tropes of how men and women should be in relationships, like financially and things like that. But by definition, they are not femcels if they're being in relationships with men. Yes, they might like still call themselves femcels, but by definition, they're not. These are women who, again, feel like they need to go back into their true feminine nature, heal their divine feminine in order to attract a high-value man who will have a very traditional role in financially supporting her. This, again, is a post-feminist archetype of a woman who swang too far in the opposite direction on the pendulum from feeling like feminism has wronged her to aligning with ultra-conservative values of how relationships between men and women should operate. The author quotes dating influencer Margarita Nazarenko. She says, "Women have value, men gaslight you and pretend you don't, but we all know men chase women. That is the natural biological order of the world." Perhaps there is some truth to a statement like this. For example, the fact that women feel devalued, and it's so easy for men to manipulate women because they feel like they have such low self-esteem, they have no confidence, they think of themselves as like nothing if they don't have a man, and that's why it's so easy for them to be manipulated and abused in relationships. But when you bring up biological order, this person is now bioessentialist and is no longer a feminist or a femcel for that matter. Feminism genuinely does not have a point if you believe the propaganda of a biological order or a biological basis of gender. Like, it doesn't have a point. Because if you believe that men and women are a specific way because gender is in any way biological, then there's no point in even trying to make men and women be equal. Because by your thinking or your understanding, there's a biological order already, right? So there's literally no point to feminism if you think biologically men and women are this way for a reason. The author writes in this article, in addition to abstaining from sex, the movement also encourages women to refuse to pay for anything, with the expectation that the man should be financially responsible during the courting and the relationship itself. Femcels do not abstain from sex and then also still date men, because that wouldn't make sense. But they also don't abstain from sex to punish men or to not decrease their own value, because like having a casual hookup will decrease your value as a woman or something. It's not to like teach men a lesson about women's innate value and that men should chase us. Femcels abstain from sex typically because of trauma, or honestly just because they don't want to, or because they have low self-esteem or low confidence. Another issue in this is that people are so obsessed or focused on whether other people are having sex or not, because there's such a high importance put on romantic relationships because of obviously a lot of reasons. I mean, a lot of focus is put on romantic relationships in order to keep women wanting to subscribe to the idea of marriage and subscribe to the idea of being in a relationship with a man. Like, romance itself is romanticized in order to make it seem like something that benefits women or something that like is like a beautiful thing to partake in. As I said, financial support in a relationship sets the social, political, sexual scene for the rest of the relationship. If you're subordinate and submissive financially, you're also those things at every other aspect of the relationship. You don't have more value than the man if he is paying for everything for you. You have less value than him because you don't have your own money and you're financially dependent on someone. Not even to mention the danger that can come if that relationship becomes abusive and he's your only source of finance. Because a man like that knows that he's your only source of finance and will manipulate that if you're not like giving anything back to him except for like existing. Women don't actually have more value than men in a relationship. That just becomes gender essentialism 101. This thinking is conservative. It's post-feminist to conflate any idea like this with feminism or even femcels, because that is like super dangerous. To make it seem like there's feminist accounts on TikTok who are posting about how to take advantage of a man financially literally damages the entire feminist movement, because our whole thinking is that men should not financially support women in a very traditional marital sort of relationship. The takeaway from talking about and acknowledging these post-feminist archetypes, as I've somewhat coined them, which are really popular on the internet. And there's actually a lot of women who have been talking about this currently. But the idea that a lot of hobbies or certain ways of thinking or activities or like just ways to be as a woman tend to be co-opted or lead women down a conservative pathway. It is so easy as a woman to just be what is expected of you and to believe lies as well, because like that's literally what we've been taught to do growing up. And also to never question any of these things further than surface level. And I think that as a whole is what allows choice feminism to thrive. For example, like choice feminists will defend people like Nara Smith, for example, who are literally being triad wives and are conservative women who are making it difficult for other women because there is a choice that the woman is making. If you're choosing to be conservative and woman-hating as a woman, then I don't like you. Like, I'm not like, no, as a woman, she should be able to do whatever she wants. No. The inability to critically think about anything or attempt to go below the surface level is really not good. I'm going to list some examples of like alt-right pipelines for women, which there's been a lot of TikToks about this recently, but they include like the Justin Baldoni Blake Lively situation and by proxy the Johnny Depp Amber Heard situation. However you felt about that situation, if you're on Johnny Depp's side, like all of these things, if you refuse to believe the woman who gets abused, that is conservative thinking and that is like abuse apology. The I'm Just a Girl trend, which very much misinterpreted the No Doubt song it was based on, but also in saying that Gwen Stefani had like Japanese girls around her as props. So I don't know if she's like the best icon for feminism either. Diet culture and eating disorder content, which also tends to align very closely with false gut health information, which hurts me as a microbiology major because I saw, not even a microbiology major, I have a degree in microbiology, because I saw a comment of someone being like, yeah, the gut health and like sourdough sort of trend on TikTok tends to turn people down that sort of, again, like holistic healing, natural medicine, which is crazy because gut health is actually like a real thing. Like, and that's what's so annoying about a lot of these pipelines is that they start off with being things that are actually real and then they turn into like something completely crazy and scientifically untrue. Spirituality and manifesting content, even like, do you remember when shifting was big in COVID, like shifting to your dream realm or whatever it was called? I don't know. That's another pipeline. The clean girl Pilates aesthetic, and even sewing or crocheting, as I said. For so many reasons, I guess, so many creators in these categories fall down a bioessentialist masculine feminine energy pipeline, or they just get really into consumerism and then all of this sort of hobby or like idea they're associated with just becomes an aesthetic rather than something they're just interested in. It becomes how they want to show themselves to the world through like identity politics, which obviously is inherently damaging. It all feeds off this idea that feminism has harmed women in some way, which can be worded in many ways, like the main one being women have suppressed their feminine energy or have denied the feminine part of themselves for too long. And you should break free of that and heal the feminine energy or the feminine essence inside of yourself, which you've destroyed. Women feel like feminism is a negative because it means we have to get jobs now and like work and do masculine things without the critical thinking to acknowledge that probably the hardest kind of work you could be expected to do is being a 1960s housewife and bringing up like 7 children while your husband works 12 hours a day and then he comes home and like beats you. And you're also not getting paid for that kind of work. So which would you prefer? 9 to 5, girl boss, business position, or housewife work that is 24/7 and doesn't end for like 20 years straight? This sort of thinking that feminism gave women the right to work, it discounts the experiences of so many women before us, but it also like attempts to undo all of this progress that's been made and just saying that, no, women, you are actually innately feminine and innately a trad wife, and you've been denying yourself. You should go back to your feminine era. Yeah, I found an article by Jenny Jung titled I Have a Problem with TikTok Feminism by On Dit magazine. She says, but this is why TikTok feminism is so dangerous. It feeds regressive and toxic content into the minds of malleable young people who have yet to form their views on feminism. I remember as a young girl myself seeing #feminism on posts on Instagram, you know, the pussy power, period blood, girl boss activism that was going on in 2012, and taking it as gospel, not realizing how toxic that brand of feminism really is. This is the effect of social media trends on young people, and it's still a problem to this day, if not even worse. Like, of course, that 2010s feminism wasn't really feminism either, but I would say telling women that they should be strong and independent is at least a little bit better than telling women that they should like get into witchcraft and healing their divine feminine. Like, I think at least there's one better than the other. She talks about how capitalism and feminism are innately opposed, and the reason that we can't emancipate ourselves from patriarchy and being subordinate as women is also because of capitalism. Consumerism is one of the ways which women can buy into, literally, feeling like they're empowered and free. But you can't be free under a patriarch capitalist. Like, you can buy all of these things which will make you feel like you're empowered and free and have the ability to do all these things, but you're just like spending money to make an aesthetic, realistically. In this article as well, she mentions Simone de Beauvoir and her book The Second Sex, wherein de Beauvoir refers to the myth of woman, which refers to the ideas of womanhood that are based in and reinforce beliefs of some kind of feminine essence. And I found an article by Adam Kjellgren titled The Myth of Woman about how Simone de Beauvoir's theory relates to like anthropological history about goddesses and gods and belief systems and things like that. These images of a feminine mystique were all created by men, which women seek to embody, which in turn denies their own subjectivity. The mythologies created around female goddesses, like in primitive times, might initially seem to you that like these societies were under matriarchs, or these societies thought better of women than we do currently. But that's not really true. For a long time, like female goddesses have been said to reflect how in primitive times, political power actually was with women and not men. And that's why when you see the witchcraft, like witch talk sort of things, how they're so close to worshipping female goddesses and the divinity of women and a feminine essence. De Beauvoir rejects this idea. She argues that literary myths have been created by men specifically because he did not understand how women worked. In primitive societies, say, they believed there was some mystical, magical link between women and the fertility of nature. Women were seen as like worshipable because it seemed supernatural in a way at the time. Men only worshipped female goddesses because of their dependence on nature and fear of the ability for women to create life, because that seemed like such a crazy thing at that time, obviously in primitive times when like no one knew how anything worked. So this notion is exactly what witch talk worships and what divine feminine energy is based in. This like super primitive idea that women are like magical and create life, and that makes them like goddesses or, you know, divine and powerful. That again is not actually feminism in any way. It's like the fear that men had of women, and again probably the dislike and contempt they had towards them. De Beauvoir writes, as powerful as she may appear, she is defined through notions created by the male consciousness. She incarnates only the static aspects of society. Man continues to monopolize the functions that open this society to nature. As women, we should attempt to be more than just a role that was given to us as women centuries ago by men who, even though they acknowledged that women had some ability to create life, which was obviously very important in maintaining human societies, and they saw a relation between women's fertility and natural environments, they still sought to, as de Beauvoir says, monopolize these natural environments and capitalize off these environments, and colonialism as well. It's all like based in the same idea of men attempting to colonize something which they saw as feminine, which I don't think can be like turned on its head and make women out to be like powerful. And men wanted to destroy our feminineness, and that's why they colonized countries. Like, there's no power or empowerment to be taken in that as women. Like, I think we should be more than what men feared us to be. Women are more than just a reproductive system as well. It doesn't make us superior or inferior to men. Like, the gender divide is always an issue. There's nothing actually real about or innate about the difference between men and women, right? Another example this author uses is the idea of female and male gaze. The concept of the male gaze is built on Margaret Atwood's famous quote, which I'll read for you. Male fantasies is everything run by male fantasies. Up on a pedestal or down on your knees, it's all a male fantasy. That you're strong enough to take what they dish out or else too weak to do anything about it. Even pretending you aren't catering to male fantasies is a male fantasy. Pretending you're unseen, pretending you have a life of your own, that you can wash your feet and comb your hair, unconscious of the ever-present watcher peering through the keyhole in your own head, if nowhere else. You are a woman with a man inside watching a woman. You are your own voyeur. This quote is essentially the definition of the male gaze. By that same logic, there cannot be a female gaze. So you might have seen all these videos on TikTok of being like dressing for the male gaze, and it's all like these basic like white girl outfits, versus dressing for the female gaze, and it's like a completely different aesthetic that is apparently female. All of these aesthetics are a male fantasy. Just saying that you're dressing for the female gaze doesn't make it feminism, because you're still doing the same actions under a patriarchy which feed off your subordination. To some degree, everything a woman does will be catering to some kind of male fantasy. Whether you're dressing like a basic white girl from LA, a cool Scandi girl, or like a Harajuku girl, or you're dressing like a man, it's all the male gaze because the female gaze does not exist. And I guess the main point with that is that, again, you can't reshape the patriarchy to benefit you. And I guess the ending note of this episode is that many forms of online feminism or reclaiming womanhood, which has been suppressed by the expectation of women to be something more than what is expected of us, are all seriously regressive ideas. You cannot repackage misogynistic and patriarchal ideas to be liberatory. You're just cosplaying male fantasies or playing the exact role that a woman is expected to play. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I kind of just wanted to do a deep dive into all of these sort of like post-feminist groups, as I've called them throughout this video. And obviously, I'd recommend you read that article, which I've been referencing throughout the whole episode. It'll be in the references to this video. So I hope you guys learned something. I hope you guys are less likely to fall down the post-feminist hole after listening to this. Thank you so much for listening, and I will have another episode out for you next week. Bye.